When the HOA president showed up at my garage with his fake security guard and threatened to steal my house over a motorcycle, he made one critical mistake. He had no idea that for the past 22 years, I'd been an Army Ranger specializing in taking down criminal organizations. This suburban wannabe dictator was about to learn what real authority looks like. When I bought the house at 142 Maple Street, in the quiet suburb of Pinewood Hills, I thought I'd finally found peace. After 22 years in the Army Rangers, including 4 tours overseas and countless classified missions, all I wanted was a place to fix up motorcycles in my garage and maybe grow some tomatoes in the backyard. The house was perfect. A modest 2-story colonial with a detached garage, sitting on a corner lot with plenty of space. The previous owner, an elderly veteran named Frank, had maintained it well but hadn't updated much since the 1980s. That suited me fine. I preferred doing things myself anyway. The neighborhood seemed friendly enough during my initial visits. Kids rode bikes on the sidewalks, neighbors waved from their porches, and everything looked exactly like the American dream I'd been fighting to protect all those years overseas. What I didn't know was that beneath this picture-perfect surface lurked a nightmare that would test every skill I'd learned in 2 decades of military service. The problem started exactly 3 days after I moved in. I was in my garage, unpacking, tools and setting up my motorcycle repair station, when a shadow fell across the doorway. I looked up to see a tall, thin man in his 50s, wearing pressed khakis and a polo shirt, with some kind of official-looking logo. His expression carried the kind of self-important authority I'd encountered many times in the military, usually from desk officers who'd never seen real combat. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I'm Richard Blackwood, president of the Pinewood Hills Homeowners Association. We need to discuss several violations I've observed on your property." I set down my wrench and walked over, extending my hand. "Nice to meet you, Richard. I'm Jake Mitchell. What kind of violations are we talking about?" He ignored my outstretched hand and pulled out a clipboard, flipping through several pages with theatrical importance. "First, your motorcycle is visible from the street, which violates our aesthetic standards. Second, that American flag you've mounted on your porch is the wrong size according to our guidelines. Third, your grass is approximately 1 inch too tall based on our maintenance requirements." I glanced at my Harley, which was barely visible, through the garage door, then at the flag I'd proudly displayed after every deployment, and finally at my lawn, which looked perfectly normal to me. "Richard, I just moved in 3 days ago. Maybe we could start with a friendly conversation about the neighborhood rather than a list of violations." His smile was as cold as a winter morning in Afghanistan. "Mr. Mitchell, this is a premium community with standards. If you wanted to live like a college student, you should have bought in a different neighborhood. These violations need to be corrected within 72 hours, or you'll face fines starting at $500 each." That's when I knew I was dealing with a particular type of person, the kind who'd never faced real authority or genuine danger, so they created their own little kingdom where they could feel powerful. I'd seen it before in small-town sheriffs, corporate middle managers, and now, apparently, HOA presidents. "I'll take a look at the community guidelines," I said calmly. "Could you provide me with a copy?" "They were included in your welcome packet," he snapped. "Ignorance of the rules isn't an excuse." After he left, I searched through every piece of paperwork from the house purchase. No welcome packet, no community guidelines. I called the previous owner, Frank, who confirmed he'd never received anything like that either. It was becoming clear that Richard ran his HOA like a military dictatorship, except without the discipline, honor, or legitimate authority that came with actual military service. The next morning, I found a formal violation notice taped to my front door. The language was aggressive and threatening, demanding immediate compliance with regulations I'd never been given. The fines had mysteriously increased overnight to $750 each. I was also informed that failure to comply would result in legal action and potential foreclosure on my property. Now, I dealt with actual terrorists who were less heavy-handed than this suburban wannabe dictator. I decided to do what I always did when facing an unknown enemy: reconnaissance. I spent the next week observing the neighborhood, talking to other residents, and gathering intelligence on Richard Blackwood and his operation. What I discovered was disturbing. The Pinewood Hills HOA was essentially Richard's personal fiefdom. He'd been president for 8 consecutive years, running unopposed because he'd systematically intimidated anyone who might challenge him. The monthly meetings were held at inconvenient times with minimal notice. The financial records were kept secret, and the rules seemed to change depending on who was being targeted. Mrs. Peterson, an elderly widow 3 houses down, told me she'd been fined $2,000 because her rose bushes were allegedly the wrong shade of pink. The Johnsons, a young couple with twin babies, faced constant harassment about their children's toys being visible in their yard. Mr. Chen, a respected doctor, had been threatened with legal action because his car was parked 6 inches too far from the curb. But the most telling conversation was with Tom Bradley, a construction foreman who lived on Oak Street. Tom had military experience too, Marine Corps, and he recognized something familiar in my bearing. "Jake," he said as we stood in his driveway, "that guy's been terrorizing this neighborhood for years. He's got some kind of deal worked out with his brother-in-law, who's a local attorney. They threaten people with lawsuits they can't afford to fight, collect fines for made-up violations, and basically extort money from hard-working families. Has anyone tried to stop him?" I asked. Tom laughed bitterly. 3 families have moved away rather than deal with his harassment. The Williamses tried to challenge him last year, and suddenly they were getting violation notices every single day. Their water got shut off for emergency repairs that lasted a week. Someone even called child services on them anonymously, claiming their yard was dangerous for their kids. That's when I realized this wasn't just about power tripping or petty tyranny. This was organized harassment with financial motives, and it needed to be stopped. The escalation came exactly 1 week later. I was working on my Harley in the garage when Richard appeared again, this time with 2 other men. One was clearly his brother-in-law, the attorney, based on the expensive suit and predatory smile. The other was a large guy in a security uniform who looked like he spent more time at the gym than actually securing anything. "Mr. Mitchell," Richard announced, "you've ignored multiple violation notices. We're here to inform you that legal proceedings are beginning immediately. You have 24 hours to remove the motorcycle, replace the flag, and bring your property into compliance, or we'll be forced to place a lien on your home." The attorney stepped forward, handing me a thick envelope. "This is a cease and desist order regarding your continued violations of community standards. Any further non-compliance will result in a lawsuit seeking damages and your removal from the community." I looked at the papers, then at the 3 men standing in my driveway like some kind of suburban intimidation squad. The security guard had positioned himself to block my garage exit, a classic intimidation tactic that might work on scared homeowners, but was laughably amateur to someone with my background. "Gentlemen," I said calmly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I've been trying to get a copy of these community standards you keep referencing, but nobody seems able to provide them." Richard's face reddened. "Don't play dumb with us, Mitchell. Everyone in this community knows the rules." "Actually," I replied, pulling out my phone and opening the voice recorder app, "I've spoken with several neighbors, and it seems like the rules change depending on who you're talking to and what you want from them." The attorney's eyes narrowed when he saw the phone. "Are you recording this conversation?" "Just making sure I have accurate records for my own attorney," I said. "See, I did some research on you guys this week. Interesting business model you've got going. Create vague, constantly changing rules. Selectively enforce them against people you want to intimidate. Collect illegal fines, and threaten lawsuits you never intend to file because they wouldn't hold up in court." The security guard stepped closer, trying to use his size to intimidate me. "Maybe you should mind your own business, old man." I looked at him with the kind of calm that comes from facing actual danger thousands of times. "Son, I've been shot at by professionals. You don't scare me." Richard sensed the situation slipping out of his control. "We're trying to be reasonable here, Mitchell. Just follow the rules like everyone else. Show me the rules, I said simply. Provide me with an official copy of the HOA guidelines, properly filed with the county, along with documentation that I was legally notified of them when I purchased my property. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Finally, the attorney cleared his throat. The rules are available upon request. I'm requesting them. Another pause. We'll have them to you by the end of the week. Great, I said. Until then, I'll continue maintaining my property according to standard municipal codes and common sense. As they walked away, I heard Richard hissing angrily at his companions, but I couldn't make out the words. I didn't need to. I'd just declared war, and he knew it. The retaliation started immediately. That night, someone spray-painted "Comply or Leave" across my garage door. The next morning, my mailbox was knocked over. By the third day, I found all 4 tires on my truck slashed. But Richard had made a crucial mistake. He was treating me like just another scared homeowner, instead of someone who'd spent 2 decades dealing with people who were actually dangerous. Every action he took just gave me more evidence and more motivation. I installed security cameras around my property, high-resolution models with night vision that captured everything in perfect detail. I documented every incident, every threat, every act of vandalism. I researched HOA law and discovered that half of what Richard was doing was illegal, and the other half was legally questionable at best. Most importantly, I started organizing the other residents. Tom Bradley was my first recruit. His military background meant he understood operational planning and had the discipline to follow through on complex strategies. Mrs. Peterson joined us because she was tired of being bullied over her roses. Dr. Chen brought credibility and professional connections. Within 2 weeks, we had a core group of 12 families who were ready to fight back. The confrontation came at the monthly HOA meeting, which Richard had scheduled for a Wednesday afternoon when most working people couldn't attend. He'd counted on the usual turnout of maybe 5 or 6 residents, just enough to maintain the illusion of community involvement while keeping actual oversight to a minimum. Instead, 43 people showed up. I'd spent the previous week going door to door, talking to every homeowner in the community, sharing what I'd learned about Richard's operation, and inviting them to attend the meeting. I'd also contacted a journalist from the local newspaper who specialized in municipal corruption, and she was sitting in the back row with her recorder running. Richard walked into the community center expecting his usual captive audience and found himself facing a room full of angry residents with documentation of his years of harassment. His confident smile disappeared immediately. "I call this meeting to order," he began, but Dr. Chen stood up. "Point of order," Chen said. "According to HOA law, any homeowner can request to see the association's financial records, legal documentation, and official governing documents. We're making that request now." Richard's face went pale. "Those documents aren't available for review." "Actually," I said, standing up with a folder full of legal precedents I'd researched, "state law requires HOA documents to be available for homeowner inspection. Failure to provide them within 30 days is a misdemeanor offense." The room buzzed with murmurs as other residents realized they'd never been shown any official documentation either. Mrs. Peterson raised her hand. "I've been living here for 15 years, she said, her voice shaking slightly but determined. "I've paid thousands of dollars in fines, but I've never seen an actual written rule that says my roses were the wrong color." One by one, other residents stood up to share their experiences. The arbitrary fines, the selective enforcement, the threats and intimidation. The pattern became undeniable as story after story painted a picture of systematic abuse of power. Richard tried to regain control, pounding his gavel and demanding order, but the crowd wasn't having it. Finally, Tom Bradley called out from the middle of the room, "Richard, we know about your arrangement with your brother-in-law. We know about the fake legal threats and the illegal fines. We've documented everything, and we've already filed complaints with the State Attorney General's office." The room fell silent. Richard's face went through several shades of red before settling on a sickly pale green. "You people don't understand," he stammered. "I've worked hard to maintain property values in this community. Everything I've done has been for your benefit." "No," I said, walking to the front of the room. "Everything you've done has been for your benefit. You've created a system designed to extract money from your neighbors through intimidation and fake legal threats. That's not community leadership. That's extortion." I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's projector. "Everyone needs to see this." The security camera footage played on the big screen. Richard's security guard spray painting my garage. Richard himself knocking over mailboxes. The attorney's brother-in-law slashing tires while Richard served as a lookout. 3 months of criminal activity, all captured in high definition with timestamps and GPS coordinates. The room erupted in angry voices as residents saw proof of what many had suspected for years. Richard tried to leave, but Tom Bradley and 2 other veterans were blocking the exits. "Sit down, Richard," I said calmly. "We're not done yet." The next part of my presentation showed the financial analysis I'd compiled. Using public records and information gathered from residents, I'd calculated that Richard had collected over $200,000 in illegal fines over the past 5 years, money that had never been used for community improvements, never been properly accounted for, and had essentially disappeared into his personal accounts. "This isn't just harassment," I explained to the room. "This is organized theft." The journalist in the back was furiously taking notes, and I could see her eyes light up as she realized she'd stumbled onto a major story. Richard finally found his voice. "You can't prove any of this. It's all hearsay and speculation." I smiled the same calm smile I'd used on insurgents who thought they were smarter than they actually were. "Richard, I've been investigating criminal organizations for 22 years. Compared to Taliban weapons smugglers and international drug cartels, you're amateur hour." That's when the police arrived. Not because Richard had called them, but because I had. 3 hours earlier, I'd walked into the sheriff's office with boxes of evidence, camera footage, financial documents, and testimony from dozens of residents. They'd been building their own case while we were having our meeting. Detective Maria Santos entered the community center with 2 patrol officers and a warrant for Richard's arrest. The charges included extortion, fraud, vandalism, and criminal harassment. His brother-in-law, the fake attorney, was arrested at his office the same day for practicing law without a license and conspiracy to commit fraud. The security guard turned out to be Richard's unemployed nephew, who'd been impersonating a licensed security officer while committing crimes for his uncle. He was arrested that evening at his apartment, surrounded by evidence of his role in the harassment campaign. As Richard was led away in handcuffs, he looked at me with the kind of hatred usually reserved for actual enemies of the state. "This isn't over, Mitchell," he snarled. I looked him straight in the eye. "Yeah, it is." The aftermath was swift and satisfying. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the HOA corruption scandal, which was picked up by regional news outlets, and eventually made national headlines as an example of suburban governance gone wrong. Richard's arrest sparked investigations into HOA practices across the state, leading to new legislation protecting homeowners from harassment and requiring transparent financial reporting. Our community held an emergency election for new HOA leadership. Dr. Chen was elected president by unanimous vote, with a mandate to create actual, sensible community guidelines and ensure transparent operations. The first order of business was returning all the illegal fines Richard had collected, funded by the seizure of his personal assets during the criminal proceedings. Mrs. Peterson planted a beautiful garden of roses in every color imaginable, right in her front yard where everyone could enjoy them. The Johnsons' kids played freely on their lawn without fear of violation notices. Tom Bradley organized a neighborhood barbecue where families who'd been afraid to interact for years finally got to know each other as friends, rather than potential sources of complaints. As for me, I kept working on motorcycles in my garage, which was now officially designated as a community gathering space where anyone could stop by for mechanical help or just to chat. My American flag flies proudly on my porch. the same flag that accompanied me through 4 combat deployments, and now watches over a neighborhood where families can live without fear. 6 months later, Richard pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges and was sentenced to 3 years in prison plus restitution to his victims. His brother-in-law lost his license to practice law and faced his own criminal charges. The security guard nephew spent 6 months in jail and was ordered to perform community service maintaining the neighborhood common areas he'd once helped vandalize. Sometimes people ask me if I overreacted, if maybe I should have just moved the motorcycle and followed the rules to keep the peace. But I learned a long time ago that bullies only understand strength, and sometimes the most important battles are fought not on foreign battlefields, but in our own backyards. The truth is, I didn't move to Pinewood Hills looking for a fight. I just wanted to fix motorcycles and grow tomatoes. But when someone threatens the peace and security of a community, someone needs to stand up and fight back. And after 22 years of defending America overseas, defending it at home felt like a natural extension of my service. Today, Pinewood Hills is everything I hoped it would be when I first bought my house. Kids ride bikes without fear of noise violations. Neighbors help each other with yard work and home repairs. The monthly HOA meetings are well attended, transparent, and focused on actually improving our community rather than lining anyone's pockets. And every morning when I raise that American flag on my porch, I'm reminded that freedom isn't something you win once and keep forever. It's something you have to defend every single day. Whether that's against foreign enemies or domestic bullies who think a clipboard and a fake badge make them powerful. Some battles are worth fighting, and some enemies need to learn that not everyone will back down when threatened. Richard Blackwood learned that lesson the hard way, and our community is stronger because someone finally said no. The best part? My tomatoes came in beautifully that first summer, and I shared them with the entire neighborhood. If you enjoyed watching this neighborhood bully get exactly what he deserved, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories about justice being served. Have you ever dealt with an abusive HOA or neighborhood tyrant? Drop your story in the comments below. Your experience could be featured in our next video. And if you're currently dealing with HOA harassment, remember that bullies only understand strength, and there are always legal ways to fight back. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another story of the little guy winning against corrupt authority figures.